On December 7, 1941, Japanese bombs destroyed America's Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, severing the supply line for one of the military's most critical materials, silk. Nearly every parachute in the U.S. military inventory was made from Japanese silk, with approximately 80 million pounds imported annually before the war. Within hours of the attack, that supply became enemy territory. The timing was catastrophic. America planned to train hundreds of thousands of airborne troops and aircrew, all requiring parachutes. Each B-17 bomber carried 10 parachutes for its crew, and fighter pilots depended on them as their only means of escape from disabled aircraft. Paratroopers would need silk canopies to jump from C-47 transports into combat. But the silk was gone. Japan controlled 90% of the world's raw silk production, and what remained in American warehouses would equip perhaps 10,000 parachutes, a fraction of wartime needs. Without parachutes, America couldn't field an air force. Fortunately, a solution already existed, though few knew it yet. 5 years earlier, a brilliant but deeply troubled chemist named Wallace Carruthers had synthesized the world's first completely synthetic fiber in a DuPont laboratory. The material, called nylon, had been marketed exclusively for women's stockings. Its inventor never lived to see his creation's greatest purpose, saving the lives of thousands of airmen and paratroopers when natural silk disappeared. This is the story of how Depression-era polymer chemistry, fashion marketing, and wartime necessity converged to create synthetic parachutes, and how the material synthesized from coal, air, and water became the fiber that helped win World War II. Wallace Hume Carruthers was born on April 27, 1896, in Burlington, Iowa. The eldest of 4 children, his father taught commercial subjects at Capital City Commercial College in Des Moines. Young Wallace initially studied accounting and secretarial administration there, before transferring to Tarkio College in Missouri to pursue chemistry, a decision that would change material science forever. After completing his bachelor's degree in 1920, Carruthers taught at the University of South Dakota for 1 year before enrolling at the University of Illinois for doctoral studies. He worked under Carl Speed Marvel and Roger Adams, 2 giants of organic chemistry, earning his PhD in 1924. His dissertation focused on complex organic synthesis requiring exceptional precision and creativity. Carruthers moved to Harvard University as an instructor in 1926, where he taught organic chemistry while conducting polymer research, but he was already showing signs of the depression that would eventually kill him. He experienced what he called neurotic spells of diminished capacity, periods where intellectual work became impossible. In 1927, when DuPont's Charles Stein recruited Carruthers for the company's new fundamental research program, Carruthers initially refused, explaining that he suffered from neurotic spells that might constitute a serious handicap. But DuPont's offer was extraordinary: complete research freedom with no requirement to produce commercially viable products, just pure science. Carruthers accepted in February 1928, joining DuPont's experimental station near Wilmington, Delaware. He was 31 years old, America's most promising polymer chemist, beginning the most productive and tragically brief period of his career. Carruthers' first major achievement came unexpectedly in April 1930. His assistant, Arnold M. Collins, isolated a compound called chloroprene while investigating acetylene polymers. Chloroprene spontaneously polymerized into a rubber-like solid, the first synthetic rubber superior to natural rubber in specific applications. DuPont commercialized it as neoprene in 1931. The product became commercially successful, though expensive, used primarily for oil-resistant gaskets, hoses, and industrial applications. More importantly, it validated DuPont's fundamental research program and gave Carruthers confidence to pursue more ambitious goals. By 1934, DuPont executives were pressuring Carruthers to focus on synthetic fibers, specifically finding an alternative to silk. The Great Depression had hurt DuPont's bottom line, and management wanted commercial applications from their expensive research program. Carruthers turned his attention to polyamides, polymers containing repeating amide linkages. His theoretical work suggested that polyamides, through hydrogen bonding, could form crystalline domains, giving them mechanical properties similar to natural silk, but with superior durability. The critical work was conducted by Dr. Fair, Peterson Dr. Donald Kaufman, and later Dr. Gerard Berchet, all working under Carruthers' direction. They systematically synthesized dozens of polyamides from different combinations of diamines and dicarboxylic acids. During the summer of 1934, Carruthers disappeared. He didn't come to work for days. Colleagues eventually found him at the Phipps Clinic near Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, where he had committed himself for psychiatric treatment of severe depression. After brief treatment, he returned to DuPont, but the incident foreshadowed the tragedy to come. On February 28, 1935, Gerard Berchet produced the breakthrough, combining hexamethylene diamine, 6 carbon atoms, with adipic acid, also 6 carbon atoms, created a polyamide designated 6,6. The material had a high melting point, excellent tensile strength, elasticity, and the crucial property of being drawable into fine, strong fibers. Elmer K. Bolton, Carruthers' supervisor, recognized commercial potential immediately. He assigned Dr. George Graves to work with Carruthers on developing the polymer into a manufacturable product. The research expanded dramatically, with dozens of chemists and engineers refining the synthesis, fiber production, and applications. DuPont obtained a patent for nylon in September 1938, but Wallace Carruthers never saw it. On February 21, 1936, Carruthers married Helen Sweetman, a chemistry graduate who worked for DuPont preparing patent applications. They had been dating since 1934. Friends later said the marriage seemed to bring Carruthers some happiness, though he remained troubled by depression. In January 1937, Carruthers' younger sister died suddenly. The loss devastated him. His depression, which had always lurked in the background, became overwhelming. He felt he had accomplished nothing despite his revolutionary discoveries. He believed he had run out of ideas, that his creativity was exhausted. On April 28, 1937, Carruthers went to the experimental station as usual, around 5 p.m. The next day, April 29th, he was found dead in his hotel room. A squeezed lemon and cyanide salt sat nearby. No suicide note was found. Wallace Carruthers died at age 41, 16 months before DuPont publicly announced nylon's discovery. He never saw women mobbing stores for nylon stockings, never knew his polymer would save thousands of lives in World War II, never understood that his invention would launch the entire synthetic materials industry. But his work survived him. DuPont continued developing Nylon 6,6 under George Graves' leadership, moving toward commercialization that would transform consumer goods and military logistics. On October 27, 1938, Charles Stein, DuPont's vice president for research, stood before 3,000 women gathered at the site of the upcoming New York World's Fair. He wasn't addressing a scientific conference or industry association. He was speaking to the Federation of Women's Clubs. Stein unveiled DuPont's revolutionary synthetic fiber, announcing dramatically that though wholly fabricated from such common raw materials as coal, water, and air, nylon can be fashioned into filaments as strong as steel, as fine as a spider's web. The marketing strategy was brilliant. Rather than emphasizing chemistry, DuPont positioned nylon as miraculous but natural, derived from abundant American materials, not exotic imported silk. The coal, water, and air phrase became nylon's tagline. The name nylon itself reflected marketing savvy. DuPont had initially called it no run, though this was a myth. Nylon stockings did run. When lawyers raised trademark concerns, the name evolved from neuron to nylon to finally nylon, a word that sounded scientific but meant nothing specific, allowing DuPont to retain control while making it seem like a generic term. DuPont deliberately chose not to trademark nylon, encouraging the word to enter American vocabulary as synonymous with stockings, generating free advertising and massive consumer demand. Nylon made its grand public debut at the 1939 New York World's Fair, where a model dubbed Miss Chemistry wore nylon stockings. The exhibition's theme, World of Tomorrow, perfectly captured nylon's promise, a scientifically advanced future where synthetic materials would improve everyday life. The first test sale occurred in Wilmington, Delaware, DuPont's headquarters. On October 24, 1939, DuPont offered 4,000 pairs of nylon stockings exclusively to employees' wives at the experimental station. They sold out in 3 hours. National sales began May 15, 1940. The response was unprecedented. 4 million pairs sold in 4 days. Despite costing $1.15 per pair, about 1.5 times more expensive than silk stockings, women lined up to buy them. By year's end, 64 million pairs had sold. The appeal was practical. Nylon stockings lasted longer than silk, washed easily, dried quickly, and resisted runs better, though not perfectly. Fashion-conscious women appreciated the sleek appearance. Nylon's slight sheen looked more modern than dull rayon alternatives. DuPont had built a full-scale nylon plant in Seaford, Delaware, that began commercial production in late 1939. The facility represented massive investment in manufacturing infrastructure, polymerization reactors, fiber spinning equipment, quality control systems, all designed around producing millions of pounds of nylon annually. By 1941, nylon had become a cultural phenomenon. Women purchased an average of 8 pairs of stockings per year, a huge market. DuPont projected production of 360 million pairs annually. The company had created the first commercially successful thermoplastic polymer, a material that could be melted and formed into fibers, films, and diverse shapes, launching the modern plastics industry. Then came Pearl Harbor. 4 days after Pearl Harbor, on December 11, 1941, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. America was now fighting a two-ocean war against enemies controlling virtually all global silk production. The War Production Board issued emergency orders. Civilian nylon production ceased immediately. All nylon manufacturing capacity would be diverted to military applications. The priorities were clear. Parachutes held highest priority, followed by parachute cord for suspension lines, tire cord for aircraft tires, tents, mosquito netting critical for the Pacific Theater, ropes and cordage for various military uses, and experimental flak jackets. Overnight, nylon stockings vanished from store shelves. The last pairs produced before the ban sold on the black market for up to $20, equivalent to roughly $428 today. Women who couldn't obtain nylons resorted to painting seams down their legs with makeup to create the illusion of stockings or using spray-on liquid hosiery products. DuPont's Seaford plant converted from stocking production to military parachute fabric within weeks. The company expanded capacity rapidly, building additional facilities and training thousands of workers. By 1943, DuPont was producing nylon at unprecedented scale. Millions of pounds monthly, nearly all for military use. Pre-war American parachutes used Japanese silk exclusively. Silk had excellent properties for parachutes: low weight, compact packing, adequate strength to support a falling human's deceleration loads, and breathability that allowed controlled air leakage, stabilizing descent. But silk had disadvantages: high cost even before war cut off supply, degradation when wet or stored improperly, limited tensile strength that was adequate but not exceptional, and supply vulnerability with 90% imported from Japan. When war began, the U.S. military had perhaps 10,000 silk parachutes in inventory, enough to equip initial forces, but nowhere near wartime requirements. America would train hundreds of thousands of paratroopers and aircrew, and every bomber and fighter pilot needed a parachute. The math was impossible without synthetic alternatives. Nylon solved every silk weakness. It offered superior strength with higher tensile strength than silk, allowing lighter canopies with equal load capacity. Nylon resisted rot, mildew, and environmental degradation that destroyed silk. It could be produced domestically from coal, water, and air with no dependence on foreign supply. And DuPont could scale production to millions of pounds without resource constraints. The conversion required extensive testing. Military parachutes undergo rigorous qualification: drop tests with dummies, load testing to failure, aging studies, and environmental exposure trials. Nylon had to prove reliable before lives depended on it. Tests confirmed nylon's superiority. A standard 28-foot diameter parachute made from nylon weighed approximately 20 to 25 pounds, compared to 28 to 32 pounds for equivalent silk. The weight saving was critical for pilots who wore parachutes for hours during missions. By mid-1942, nylon parachutes were standard issue. Production ramped exponentially. DuPont's wartime nylon production tells the story of industrial mobilization. 9 million pounds in 1940, primarily stockings. 65 million pounds in 1942, 90% military. 120 million pounds in 1943, 95% military, and 180 million pounds in 1944, 98% military. At peak production, DuPont manufactured nylon at 3 major facilities. The original Seaford, Delaware plant expanded in 1942 to 1943. A new plant in Martinsville, Virginia opened in 1943, and another new plant in Chattanooga, Tennessee opened in 1944. Each plant operated 24 hours daily, producing nylon in a multi-step process. Raw material synthesis of adipic acid from cyclohexane derived from coal and hexamethylene diamine from adipic acid. Polymerization combining monomers at 285 degrees Celsius under pressure to create nylon 6,6 polymer. Fiber production by melting polymer and extruding through spinnerets with tiny holes, then cooling to form filaments, drawing by stretching fibers to align polymer chains and increase strength, and finally weaving to convert fibers into parachute fabric or other products. A single T5 parachute, the standard U.S. parachute for paratroopers, used approximately 25 pounds of nylon fabric with additional nylon for suspension lines and harness webbing, totaling roughly 30 pounds of nylon per parachute. America produced approximately 2 million military parachutes during World War II, with estimated nylon consumption of 60 million pounds for parachutes alone, plus additional millions for other military applications. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, along with numerous independent parachute infantry regiments, depended entirely on nylon parachutes for combat operations. During Operation Husky in Sicily in July 1943, the first large-scale American airborne assault involved 3,400 paratroopers, jumping from C-47 transports. High winds and inexperienced pilots caused scattered drops, but the nylon parachutes performed flawlessly. Every soldier who jumped landed safely, though not always where intended. For Operation Neptune in Normandy on June 6, 1944, the 101st Airborne Division conducted night jumps behind Utah Beach using nylon parachutes. Of 6,928 paratroopers, the vast majority landed successfully despite difficult conditions, including darkness, German anti-aircraft fire, and unfamiliar terrain. Parachute failures were negligible, with losses resulting from combat, not equipment malfunction. During Operation Market Garden in the Netherlands in September 1944, the 82nd Airborne jumped near Nijmegen using nylon parachutes. Daytime drops under good conditions demonstrated nylon's reliability, with 7,277 paratroopers landing with virtually no parachute-related casualties. Throughout the Pacific Theater, aircrew survival depended on nylon parachutes. Bomber crews flying at high altitude over water needed absolute confidence their parachutes would deploy. Nylon's resistance to moisture and superior strength made survival possible in conditions where silk would have degraded. Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, forced to ditch his B-17 in the Pacific in October 1942, survived 24 days adrift partly because the nylon emergency raft, another DuPont product, remained intact in saltwater. Silk would have rotted. When Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, American newspapers carried two headlines side by side: "War ends and nylons on sale." DuPont announced it would resume civilian stocking production. Newspapers cheered with headlines like "Peace, it's here," "Nylons on sale." The motto "Nylons by Christmas" appeared everywhere. Women wanted their stockings back immediately, but DuPont couldn't convert back instantly. The plants had been reconfigured for military production, and equipment for spinning parachute fabric differed from equipment for stocking yarn. Civilian production required different quality control processes, packaging, and distribution systems. DuPont projected it would produce 360 million pairs of stockings annually, once reconversion completed, but deliveries came slower than promised. September came with minimal stock. Christmas approached with inadequate supply, and by 1946, only 30 million pairs per month were reaching stores, far below the pent-up demand from 4 years without nylons. What followed became known as the Nylon Riots, a series of mob scenes at American stores between August 1945 and March 1946. In September 1945, a small post-war shipment of stockings went on sale in scattered locations. Women who had waited 4 years for nylons rushed stores, creating crush injuries and near riots. In Pittsburgh in June 1946, an estimated 40,000 people lined up for 13,000 pairs designated for working girls only, a vague qualification that caused arguments. The line stretched over a mile, fights broke out, and police were called. In New York in November 1945, 30,000 women queued for a limited shipment. Store windows broke under crowd pressure, and several women fainted in the crush. In San Francisco, a planned sale was canceled after approximately 10,000 shoppers waiting to enter broke the store window. Several women were injured, and police declared the sale a public safety hazard. The desperation was real. Women had gone 4 years using painted-on seams and liquid hosiery. Fashion magazines had told them nylons were essential to proper appearance. Now peace had come, but the nylons hadn't. Some women improvised by cutting up military nylon tents and parachutes left from the war to make blouses and wedding dresses. Parachute silk, actually nylon, became a fashion material, repurposed from life-saving equipment to peacetime clothing. DuPont faced public hostility. Newspapers suggested the company was deliberately creating artificial scarcity to drive up prices. An advertisement in Knit Goods Weekly in 1945 called on readers to write congressmen protesting DuPont's monopoly. Some accused the company of being unpatriotic by maintaining exclusive production rights during national emergency. DuPont attempted to shame selfish housewives hoarding stock, which only increased hostility. The company's factories were actually operating at full capacity, But reconversion from military to civilian production took longer than anyone anticipated. By March 1946, DuPont finally ramped production to 30 million pairs monthly. The riots subsided and supply gradually met demand. By 1947, nylon stockings were widely available again. In 1951, the Justice Department threatened DuPont with an antitrust suit over nylon monopoly, though the case never proceeded. But the nylon riots remained a cultural memory, a moment when peacetime shortage created public fury. Nylon was the first commercially successful completely synthetic fiber, proving that polymers could match or exceed natural materials. This opened the floodgates for polyester, developed in the 1940s by British chemists and commercialized as Dacron and Terylene for clothing and industrial fabrics. Acrylic in the 1950s as a synthetic wool substitute for sweaters and blankets, spandex or lycra in 1958 as an elastic synthetic fiber revolutionizing athletic wear and undergarments. Kevlar in 1965 as a DuPont invention 5 times stronger than steel by weight used in bulletproof vests. And Nomex in the 1960s as fire-resistant synthetic used in firefighter gear and racing suits. All trace their origins to Wallace Carruthers' 1935 discovery. By proving polymers could be engineered for specific properties, Carruthers laid groundwork for the modern materials industry. Today, synthetic fibers account for approximately 60% of global textile production. Natural fibers like cotton, wool, and silk remain important, but are outnumbered by the descendants of nylon. In December 1941, when Japanese bombs severed America's silk supply, the U.S. military faced potential disaster. No parachutes meant grounded air forces and no airborne troops. The war might have been lost before it was properly fought, but a solution already existed, invented 6 years earlier by a depressed genius who never saw his polymer's greatest application. Wallace Carruthers had synthesized nylon from coal, water, and air, exactly as DuPont's marketing claimed, creating the world's first completely synthetic fiber. Nylon parachutes saved thousands of lives. Paratroopers who jumped into combat, bomber crews who bailed out over enemy territory, and fighter pilots who ejected from disabled aircraft. Every man who floated to Earth beneath a nylon canopy owed his survival partly to a chemist who died believing he'd accomplished nothing. The irony is profound. Carruthers, plagued with depression and convinced his work was worthless, killed himself 16 months before nylon's public announcement. He never knew women would riot for his stockings, never saw paratroopers drop from C-47s using his parachutes, never understood he'd launched the synthetic materials revolution. But his polymer survived, doing exactly what he designed it to do, matching natural materials' properties while eliminating their vulnerabilities. Nylon didn't rot like silk, didn't depend on foreign supply like silk, and ultimately proved stronger than silk, saving lives silk couldn't have saved. When DuPont marketed nylon as made from coal, water, and air, it wasn't an exaggeration. The raw materials were truly that simple: adipic acid derived from coal-based cyclohexane and hexamethylenidiamine, synthesized from adipic acid, reacted together with water as a byproduct. The complexity was in the chemistry, the polymer engineering that transformed simple molecules into revolutionary material. Today, nylon remains ubiquitous in parachutes, though modern designs incorporate newer materials: automotive parts, carpets, clothing, industrial machinery, and medical devices. The global nylon market exceeds $30 billion annually, all descended from Carruthers' 1935 synthesis. The man who invented it died thinking he'd failed. The reality? He'd created one of the 20th century's most important materials, saved countless lives, and launched an industry that transformed modern life. America lost all its silk in 1941, but thanks to a tragic genius working in a Delaware laboratory, it had something better: a synthetic fiber that could be manufactured from abundant domestic materials at unlimited scale, stronger than nature's original, saving lives silk never could have saved. Wallace Carruthers never jumped from a plane, never saw a parachute deployment, never knew his polymer would keep men alive as they floated to Earth under enemy fire. But every paratrooper who landed safely, every pilot who escaped a burning aircraft, every life saved by nylon, they all owed their survival to the depressed chemist who couldn't see past his own darkness to understand how brightly his creation would shine. The fiber that won the war was synthesized from coal, and the man who made it never lived to see the victory it helped achieve.